welcome back to the Meaningful Success Podcast, a show where we talk about pursuing our dreams, creativity, and building our lives around what really matters to us. My name is Wade Clark, and this is my firstborn,
Siah. And today we have a little bit of an announcement.
We do?
Well, you do.
Well, yeah, but we'll get to that in a little bit.
So before that, Father.
Yes.
What's your announcement? No, just kidding. Okay. What's your weekly win?
My weekly win is actually about the decision that I made that we will be talking about a little bit later in the show. Is this enough for a preamble?
I have an announcement. We'll talk about that in a minute. What's your win? Well, my win's my announcement, which we'll talk about in a minute. Okay, my weekly win is I am making pretty solid progress on my new book that I've been writing. And I have I think I just yesterday passed the 40,000 word mark on the whole book.
Excellent.
Yeah, so that's
about halfway there.
Roughly, it's a little under,
Okay.
but I'm, it's hitting a point where I'm starting to hit some roadblocks and some really big question marks. And so I don't know. I was kind of going on a long walk earlier today, just sort of wrestling through some of those problems with the book that I've been having. And I thought that, you know what, for my weekly win, I should just celebrate that I am making progress instead of dwelling on the struggles of that progress.
Well, the struggles are going to be part of that pursuit.
They are, but just in a sense of like discouragement and encouragement,
I see what you're saying.
Like not dwelling on anyway, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I got you.
So that's my weekly win. Yeah. So why don't you share?
Why don't I share?
Why don't you share with the class?
Share with the class? Okay, students. No. Actually, this is going to be a little bit of a kind of bare your soul type of thing in a sense. For many of you who've been listening to the show, you know that we are working on some books. If you look back over the last several years for us and for me in my life, my personal life, there's just been a lot of things that have come up. And I've been kind of running at full speed for about 7 years now. I guess what I want to announce is that I've recognized that I've just continued to push too far, too fast, without giving myself that needed time of rest, that needed break, that needed time to just disconnect, which is something that we talked about in one of our previous shows, but we talked about it in the context of, of a creative rut. We didn't really talk about just recognizing that sometimes it's important to stop, to pause, to take a break.
I feel like humans used to be better at taking long rest when needed. And some of that was the nature of, being in an agricultural society. Not that there's not work year round, of course there is, but there's heavy seasons of work and then there's seasons of relative rest,
Right, where you're waiting.
Slowing down during the winter, for example. And of course there's all kinds of historical accuracy bits there, but
right.
But the point is that we are now in a society where you're expected to operate at max capacity year round, permanent.
Yeah.
And especially when you're not in the economic place of being somebody who has things like sabbaticals built into
like academia or
like there's certain positions you can have that have that privilege, but most people don't.
Right.
And so that's kind of where this got started, was we were having a conversation about just where you are, where you've been. It was kind of a Dream Parrot thing, and it was kind of a personal thing. And it just sort of was, you sort of bared your soul to us, like you said, and we're sharing, like you were having some anxieties and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like in the, not the same circumstance, but in the Lord of the Rings, where Bilbo's talking about, I feel like butter stretched over too much bread or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm a type A personality from the standpoint, I have goals. I have a lot of things that I'm interested in. It's like everything is always another idea. And so it's always kind of going from one idea to another and different things like that. And there's good things in that because it drives you to create, it drives you to explore, it drives you to experience different things. But the flip side of that coin is that sometimes you can run and run and run and not give yourself the needed stops and the needed rest. And, I work beyond what we do through Dream Parrot. I work in a demanding career, which itself it has a lot of time demands. And we, as a family, the loss of our daughter in 2017 to cystic fibrosis, that was a very traumatic circumstance. And we haven't really gone into the details of that, but that was a traumatic circumstance. And there's been other very, very difficult, very, very traumatic and very challenging things that have gone into our lives in the personal life. And there was a time that I kind of paused things that I was doing creatively, but that was during a season of just getting up and doing the things I needed to do were accomplishments there, because when you're in deep grief with the loss of a child and things of that nature. But over the last 4 or 5 years, I have re-engaged in that, and pretty well nonstop. Taken vacations where my vacation was spent writing, or I've taken seasons where I'd get up for several weeks at a time at 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. and work on a book or something until that. Long story short, at a certain point, you start realizing, you just can't keep going at that pace. I was dealing with, stress. I was dealing with anxiety. I was dealing with panic attacks is not the right word, but something to that nature. And I shared, and we talked about that as a family. We talked about the things that we're struggling with. And I talked, several members of our family said, you have been pushing a long time and without stop. And maybe it's time for you to consider taking a sabbatical. And this was something that you thought of, your wife thought of separately, my wife thought of separately. None of you had, articulated it, but it was like each of you had the same thought, and you came to me.
Yeah, we kind of all individually had that thought in that conversation where you were sharing of, do we need to hit pause on some of the bigger business things, like keep the podcast going, but outside of that, sort of, because the reality was in so many areas, you're the bottleneck. You are the person who, you're the one who has to approve everything, not because there's not equal partnership or whatever, but because a lot of it is stuff that you've created that we're helping you bring to life. Correct. And so knowing that X, Y, or Z project is really finished, like we can't just do that by ourselves,
Right.
But seeing how run down you were getting, seeing how, just for years, not just a moment in time, but a pattern for a long time. So all of us individually had that thought and kind of started talking to each other a little bit about, I had this thought. Oh, so did I. Oh, so did I. And when you've got that kind of consensus of just those individual perspectives, I think that's something worth listening to.
Being the person who is dealing with that stress, dealing with that anxiety, dealing with that exhaustion, dealing with those struggles, sometimes you're just trying to carry too much load. When you discuss it with me, it really did not take me long to know there's wisdom in what was being suggested. I have made a decision that come May, I'm going to be starting an extended sabbatical, probably about a year long or so, where I'm
a minimum of 1 full year.
I'm not engaged in, trying to write my book, trying to write courses, doing these types of things, because anything less than a year, honestly, I would have a tough time even cutting off my brain of planning for what I'm going to be doing in 4 months or whatever. It sounds odd for those who don't struggle with this constant creative thought process, but it was not an easy decision at the same time, because I've even in the last couple of nights, I've even woken up and been up about 2 hours each night the last couple of nights, because all these things, loose ends or things that I think about are there. But you have to go back to why we're even doing this podcast. What is it in life that's most important? And for me, while the creative process and while hopefully helping others with these tools and resources is an important thing, there are other things that are equally, or I should say, much more priority. My family, my health, my faith, even things that I've sacrificed for a while and just not had an opportunity to spend time on, like my music and those types of things. It's time for me to take a step back and re-engage in those things. And honestly, the likelihood will be when I get back engaged in the books and things, I will probably have some new insights, some new wisdom, some new other things that I need to share. But the reason I thought it was important to share this on this podcast, which may seem a little bit odd to do, is that I don't think I'm alone. I think there's probably a lot of you you've got so many goals, so many demands, so many either obligations or objectives that you've got on your plate. and you're pushing and you're pushing and you're pushing. The question is, have you gotten to a point where you really need to say, you know what, maybe it's time for me to pause for a while and to renew, refocus on some other things for a period of time. Like Siah said, we're going to continue the podcast. This is a conversation we're having. And the interesting thing is, this does not mean that my vision or my mission have changed in any shape. That's something that I think is important to reemphasize. One of the things that we talk about in this podcast is, we always start with like a weekly win or something like that. There are things that are part of my DNA, like my music and other things, that re-engaging those things is part of my mission. Spending more time with my family is part of my mission. Spending time in things with my church and other things like that, that's part of my mission. So the interesting thing is, I can take this sabbatical and it doesn't mean that life is on pause or the mission's on pause or the vision's on pause. It's just that I'm reprioritizing the area that I'm going to be focusing my attention.
When I think about doing something like this, which at some point in my life, I probably will. The first thing that comes to my mind is there's this anxiety, like lost progress or like, the delay and all that kind of stuff. So how are you handling that side of the equation?
Well, like I said, I've woken up in the middle of the night and my brain starts running through various thoughts and ideas. And
so you're still kind of learning how to get out of that.
That's just it. I mean, we talked a couple of podcasts ago that this book and some of the things that contain in it, the core was written several years ago, and we've been reapproaching it from a different perspective. So this is even another year. I mean, we were originally going to launch this in 2020.
Yeah.
So this means it will not be until 2024 or something on that front. And so is there a part of me that says, oh, gee, that's lost time? The answer is yes, but I go back to what I just said previous. My life, my mission, my vision is much broader than simply the books.
Yeah.
Much broader and deeper and meaningful than simply the Dream Parrot and the things that we're doing, though these are important things. These are things that I'm passionate about.
Yeah.
So honestly, part of the process of the sabbatical and part of the reason for the need for the sabbatical, sometimes you get to a point where you don't know how to disconnect. You don't know how to cut off. You may be off work, but you're not off work in your mind. You may be off work, but your heart is constantly thinking about this or that. And it's interesting, when we say I'm going into a sabbatical, I mean, I'm still going to be doing my full-time job. So this is not like I am stopping working or anything like that. What I'm stopping is the creative process part of, and the business part of the Dream Parrot, other than the podcast, honestly, to give myself a chance to where my first instinct, my first thought is not, okay, I got to do this. Oh, I got to do that. Oh, I got to do the other thing like this. I need actually, to some degree, not reprogram, but to, in some ways, recalibrate.
Yeah.
I guess another thing that I would say, Siah, is I'd be curious from your perspective. This is a pursuit we're doing together. Mm-hmm. Both the podcast, the creative works, the books. I mean, you're the co-author of the things that we're doing. For you, how does this impact you?
On my end, there's still stuff I'm going to be doing, producing the podcast, and we're making plans for doing some sort of finalizing details. That's why, the sabbatical begins in May. Yeah. So we have a little bit of time to prepare. And, I'll work on first draft of the book and, various things like that. Honestly, to me, I think of it really as a good thing. I kind of think that you've been operating on 12% battery this whole time. And I'm curious to see, what does your 100% look like? Yeah. Your 100% battery, like having the chance to actually charge, and not be just constantly drained. I think that that'll be a good thing. And on my end, I've got my own stuff I'm doing, and
correct.
It impacts me for sure, but it's I don't know how dramatically it is going to do so.
Gotcha. This is part of the journey, honestly. Several of you may be in a situation where you need to take a break, maybe extended time like I'm planning to do, maybe a short time, but this is a conversation we want to continue having with everybody.
Yeah. Well, Father.
Yes, Siah.
What was your weekly favorite?
Oh, it's the weekly favorite.
My weekly favorite was spaghetti squash lasagna. I don't even think that's what it's called. My wife made a dish the other day that she called it spaghetti, but it had, meats and cheeses and, soft cheeses and spaghetti squash instead of noodles and stuff. Anyways, it's kind of like lasagna, but with spaghetti squash. And I really liked it. And so that was a favorite this week.
Nice.
We also got a different car this week. The last 3 cars we had were Subaru Imprezas, and they were great vehicles. But the last 2 of those we leased, and our circumstances changed. We live in a different place. We've got more things that we're doing. And so literally we were halfway into, about a year and a half into our lease, and we were already basically at the 3-year mileage. And we're like, okay, this isn't going to work. So we said, what we need to do is actually purchase a car that we don't have to worry about mileage and actually can a little bit bigger to cover some needs that we might have and that kind of thing. So, So spaghetti squash lasagna.
Spaghetti squash lasagna and a new Mazda. My weekly favorite, I had a really hard time coming up with something because I've just kind of been operating in a bit of a blur. I'm actually going to change it. I've been taking Emma for more walks.
Oh, yeah.
And that's been really nice, taking her for a lot longer walks. And it's funny, today I got home from taking her on like a 45-minute or an hour-long walk, and Emma was like the talk of the town. I had 3 separate people like slow down their cars and like yell out the window, "Oh, you have a beautiful dog." I'm like, "Emma, you're so popular."
Wow.
And of course she's just panting and has no idea what's going on. But that's been fun. It's been nice. I've been trying to get more active in general, and it's fun to kind of have a buddy to do that with.
Yep.
And take Emma with me. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I think that about wraps it up for today. I hope you share the podcast with some other folks. We welcome you to go back to some of the catalog. And how many episodes are we in? We're coming up on...
This is like 27, I believe.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different topics we've covered already. And we've got a whole lot more things in the future. And so we really do encourage you to go back, listen to those, share it with a friend, and let's continue on this journey together.
Oh, also one last thing before we wrap it up. In probably about a month and a half, we are going to be a video podcast, kind of.
Oh, that's right.
We're going to have video feeds of us like on Facecam because we're going to be living in different places. We're not going to be able to gather in the same room anymore to record. And actually that means that there will be something to watch for you guys who listen on the YouTube channel. So that's something to look forward to as well. I just wanted to throw that out there since I was like, I know there's something I wanted to talk about, but anyway.
Have to learn a new software though.
Well, thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll talk to you later.
This violet sky, I seen it.
The Meaningful Success Podcast is Siah Clark and myself, Wade Clark. Music is licensed through Epidemic Sound. It's Bring Back the Feeling by Daniel Gunderson. If you'd like to share a story or comment or have some ideas for the show, we encourage you to leave a message on SpeakPipe, and that is speakpipe.com/MSP. Love you, Siah.
Love you, Thomas.